So, hi guys, before we read today, I thought you might like to meet Lily. Here she is. She's a good girl. She's pretty energetic right this minute, right Lily? But she's very fuzzy and she's a good girl. She's learning how to not cry in her crate. Right, Lil? Good girl. Say hi guys. Hi. Alright, I'm going to let her down to play so we can read. So, Georgie was at his parents' concert when we left off. And they were asking him about what instrument they thought his little baby brother or sister would play, and it's got him thinking because he can't play the instruments the way the other people can because of his short fingers, remember? So anyway, let's go back. It says, hey there, Georgie, Franco said, rubbing the shiny bald spot on his head. How'd you like the show tonight? It went pretty well, Georgie said, nodding. He liked Franco, but sometimes backstage he'd show him card tricks. Well, you are our best critic, Franco told him with a wink. And I hear you're going to be a big brother soon. Georgie tried not to frown. Yeah, he said. Pretty exciting stuff, huh? He leaned down close toward Georgie, placing his chubby hands on his knees and lowering his voice. The question around here is, what instrument's the kid gonna take up? Personally, I'm betting on the cello, just like your old man. Georgie wasn't sure he was frowning now, but he didn't bother to hide it. Some folks swear up and down it'll be the violin, though. You got any good guesses, Georgie? Huh? Georgie looked at Franco and blinked quickly. No. Franco straightened up and rubbed his head again. I gotta say, Georgie, I like the monkey suit. Georgie looked down at his tux and shrugged. My mom made me wear it, he answered. Well, it looks great, Franco told him. You look just like one of the band. Ever think of playing the tuba? Georgie smiled back weakly. Well, yeah, maybe, he said. I really think I should be going now. All right, bye, Georgie. It was good seeing you. When Georgie got home, his parents went to change out of their concert clothes right away, but Georgie stayed in his tuxedo, and he did something he hadn't done in a very long time. He sat down at the grand piano in the front room. He placed himself carefully on the polished black bench, making sure that his custom-made jacket fell just over the edge of the seat. He sat exactly the way he'd seen so many professional pianists sit many times before, back straight, gaze focused, shoulders squared, and placed his hands on the keys. He spread his fingers as far apart as he could, farther and farther apart, until the skin between them turned white. Back when Georgie was 5, only 8 inches shorter, but still big on hope, he used to sit on his mother's lap while she played the piano. He would spread his fingers on top of hers, and their hands would dance through the melody together. When Georgie was 7, the height of an average 3-year-old, he used to tape popsicle sticks to his fingers before he played. He placed the phone book on the piano bench and flipped through the music book until he found the perfect song, one where the notes moved in great black waves across the page. And then he'd sit there with his popsicle stick fingers and pretend that he knew how to play it. But by the time he was 9, Georgie had been to enough of his parents' concerts to understand that no one could play an instrument with popsicle sticks, and as often as he pushed his ugliest thought to the back of his head, it always managed to find its way out again. Georgie would never be a musician. He'd never be taller than his dad's cello, let alone be able to wrap his arms around it. His feet would never reach the pedals of a piano. His fingers would never be long enough to play the flute. He'd never be able to grasp a drumstick properly or stretch his arms out far enough to reach the strings of his mother's harp. And if he tried to hold a tuba, it would crush him flat. Even when his parents tried him out on a kid-sized violin, Georgie had trouble bending his wrist to hold the bow, because he wasn't just short, and he didn't just have stubby fingers. He had back problems and wrist problems, sometimes even trouble bending his elbows all the way. So even if Georgie did have the talent of a violin virtuoso hidden somewhere deep inside him, no one would ever know it. But the baby? Well, he was practically a professional cellist already, according to Franco. Before Georgie was born, Had everyone in the orchestra taken bets on what instrument he would play? And how disappointed had they been when they discovered that they were wrong? Had his parents been upset too? Georgie couldn't blame them for wanting a second kid, a normal-looking violin-playing musical genius, but it still hurt being permanently replaced. Georgie slammed his fingers onto the piano keys as loudly as he could and banged the lids shut. Then he ran into his room and slammed the door to. He caught sight of the poem on the wall, and suddenly he hated it more than anything in the world. Choose the instrument that suits you. Pack your things and come along. Everyone is waiting for you. Only you complete our song. Georgie didn't belong in this room. This room for musicians. He didn't even belong in his own family. He was short, miserable, and still wearing an ugly custom-made tuxedo. He curled up on his bed and buried his head under his pillow so he wouldn't have to see the poem anymore. And he tried as hard as he could to forget about everything, but he simply couldn't. When his parents came to check on him, Georgie pretended to be asleep. Then, when the house was completely silent, he crept out of his bed in his wrinkled tux and tiptoed into the living room. And there on the couch, he found the big, fat book about babies, and he flipped through it until he discovered what he was looking for. 11 inches. That's how tall the baby was now. Georgie returned to his room and made a mark on the closet wall. He changed into his pajamas and climbed into bed, but he didn't sleep very well. He couldn't stop thinking about how 11 inches was almost as tall as the violin he'd been completely unable to play. Well, we're on chapter 13 now. We'll read a little bit of that, but poor Georgie, he's really having a hard time. I wonder how they're going to help him feel better about being a little person and having a new brother or sister. 5 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, just before school let out, Georgie sat at his desk with his chin in his hands, and as he watched as 3 rows up and 2 seats over, Andy struck his pencil on the floor twice, and he watched as Russ crossed the room to use the pencil sharpener, then passed Andy's desk on the way back, grabbing a note as he walked by. Basically, Georgie realized, his life was pretty much over. He had 0 friends. Baby Godzilla was now 14.4 inches tall, and his parents were still acting like baby-loving idiots. Soon enough, Andy would move. He'd no longer be just 6 blocks away, and that would be it for their friendship. No chance of recovery. The only good thing in the world was that tomorrow was the last day Georgie would ever have to spend working with Jeannie the Meanie on their Abraham Lincoln project. For 4 whole Fridays, Georgie had done his best to ignore Jeannie while they worked on their project together. 2 weeks in a row, he told Mr. Myers he needed to do more research in the library because only one person was allowed to have a hall pass at a time. The next week, he figured he'd done enough research, so he went into the boys' bathroom and stayed there for 20 minutes. And the week after that, he told Mr. Myers he thought he had the flu and stayed in the nurse's office until she told him his temperature was perfectly normal and kicked him out. It wasn't like he had been doing any work on the project. He had. It was just not with Jeannie. And that was fine by him. Mr. Myers had given every pair of partners a piece of paper to fill out, which they had to turn in with their report, and it was supposed to guarantee that each person had done equal work. So far, Georgie and Jeannie's paper looked like this. There's the parts Georgie did, and then there's the parts Jeannie did, and then on the bottom where there's nothing, it's the part they worked on together. So they did their own stuff, but did they do anything together? And they haven't signed it yet either. Georgie figured that tomorrow they'd work together and look up some stuff about the Gettysburg Address, and then they could fill in the last 3 blanks. Let's hope they can do that. He wasn't looking forward to it, but it had to be done. 3 minutes before the bell rang, Mr. Myers cleared his throat. "I want to remind you all," he said, "that your president projects are due first thing in the morning, and don't forget to sign off on everything you've worked on." Georgie raised his hand high. "Yes, Georgie? Don't you mean they're due tomorrow afternoon?" Georgie asked. Mr. Myers frowned. "No," he replied. "Tomorrow morning, first thing." Georgie raised his hand again. "But don't we get to work time in class to work on them?" "Nope," Mr. Myers said. "But we're not done yet."